we have this remote, what they call remote capabilities now. So Faith can, I'm assuming you're at the church?
Yes, I'm at the church.
Yeah, and I'm just one floor above where we normally shoot. Not that remote from our last episode. So Faith, what would you like to talk about today?
I'll give us a little preface to get into it first. So when I first got my call to ministry, I got all tangled up about what that would mean for the other aspects of my life. And one of the big questions that I started to wrestle with is, can I be married as a clergy person? Can I have a family as a clergy person? So our topic for today stems from that. It's, should clergy be married, and what is all of that like? So
oh yeah,
here we go.
That's a huge one. When you said, can I have a life, it reminds me of, I don't know if you've heard this. I feel like I heard this 100,000 times, but the more seasoned clergy would just say, you can't plan anything ever again, that you always have to be open, and that your congregation owns you because they pay your salary. So that begs the question then of, can I even have a regular life, just go to the movies or something, let alone have a spouse and a family, which take a lot of time, right?
Yeah, they own you. Ooh, that's a big telling bit there. But
yep, I've had someone say that. They said they own you.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that before too, and I think a lot of that comes from how pastors have historically been treated by churches. Is a mixed bag, like all things in life.
Yes.
Very much a mixed bag. So at the root of that question that I was struggling with in my teens, having a little bit of a doom spiral, because I always thought that I would have a family and a husband and do all of that wonderful cis straight narrative stuff. But when I got my call to ministry, I started really struggling, thinking, is it fair, one, to the church? And the bigger struggle for me was, is it going to be fair to my potential family that they would never come first?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the way I had phrased it in my head. And I had relationships in which I told my partner at the time, you will never come first for me because God is the ultimate trump card, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is so inherently problematic.
Absolutely.
Because I came from, I don't know where exactly all of that came from for me. Both of the pastors that were in the church I grew up in were married, had families, had like children my age, and did all of that. And from the outside looking in, I think they did it well. And I didn't hear a lot of criticism of them for that. But I think this is part of a larger context of, there are denominations that do not have married clergy, namely our friends, the Catholics, right?
Yeah.
And that is one of the reasons where you essentially marry the church instead of marrying a spouse.
Absolutely.
Did you have a similar struggle with that, or what was your kind of experience?
Yes and no. I'll say I'd always felt called to the ministry, but it didn't really slap me in the face until my mid-20s. And that's when I was flirting with the Roman Catholic Church. And I had that wonderful priest, Father Crumley, and we would talk about this. And I remember him saying, so Father Crumley was not like an isolationist Catholic. He was friends with everybody, even outside of the auspices of Christianity. And he would say, my one friend is a Methodist pastor, and he's married, and his spouse got sick, or they lost their job, or whatever. And he was just like, my gosh, how much faith those people must have to take on ministry and try to be the best spouse out there, or the best father, because you're adding on to the ministry. And I thought, whoa, what is that? And he would say one of the reasons why he was a Catholic priest is because it does free you up to do more ministry, but then you're also taking those other people out of the equation. where, and I know that sounds awful, but you don't have to explain to your kids why you're not there, or to your wife why you have to leave in the middle of the night. You're free to literally go anywhere that the church wants you to go. And so while there's a freedom in that, I think, that maybe a lot of Protestants don't get. And I don't know, so anyway, I'm clearly not a Roman Catholic because I really like being married and I have a wonderful clergy spouse. But yeah,
please don't say, and my smoking hot wife, because that's not that Anastasia is not smoking, but that's the canned male clergy response to
absolutely
my spouse.
I know, and then you're like, I don't have to tell you, you just see she's smoking.
You could just witness for yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, it definitely makes things more complicated. And so I'm recently remarried, as a matter of fact, and my spouse grew up Roman Catholic, so like the concept of being married to a clergy person was weird. But the role of, like, that informal role of the clergy spouse, or the first person, or whatever you want to call it,
the first lady,
the first lady
has historically been called,
is something that she's like discovering. And frankly, I'm discovering it too, because my ex-wife had absolutely no interest in doing any of that. But Anastasia is very good at having boundaries. Probably being an army officer for almost 20 years now gave her some really thick skin and some really heavy boundary setting. And I think that's probably the foundation of why she's such a good clergy spouse, to be honest, because she has no problems saying no directly, but nicely. Just completely amazed by her.
Direct and nice is sometimes a difficult road to walk.
Yeah, sometimes I'll watch her like just shoot things down, and I'm like, I wish I knew how to do that. I'm so impressed with that. But
could she teach classes?
Honestly, I think she probably could. And so we have this big nativity thing going on, and they're like whipping together a choir for it, and everybody wanted her to be a part of this choir. And so they were asking me...
Again, a historic role that the pastor's wife should also sing.
Oh, yes, or playing instruments. She plays...
Yeah, you either have to be the organist or like a soloist supreme.
Yeah, she plays hammer dulcimer. And so they were like, clearly she's going to play hammer dulcimer in the thing. And last week, she was there. The week before last, she had drill, so she wasn't there. And they were asking me, is your wife a soprano or an alto? And I was like, oh, I'm not answering questions for my wife. I have stepped on that cow patty way too many times. So I was like, well, you'll just have to ask her next week. And so she came up to her and asked her, and she was like, I'm going to be so busy doing other things for the nativity that I'll be singing my hardest through the seats in the pews or whatever. And I really support you, anything you guys need, but I just won't have the time to do it. And they were like, oh, okay. But I thought, it seems like such a silly thing. But when this interaction was happening, I like held my breath and I watched it. And I wanted to stop it and be like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to do this. Yeah, it definitely complicates just about everything.
Yeah, because there's this tension inherent in, I don't know, a married clergy person's life where family is holy and sacred, and we vow and covenant before God to do all these things and be all these things for our spouse, and then ultimately if there are kids that come from that or not. But you also vow, I've always been struck by how similar the ordination ceremony is, or the call ceremony is, to a marriage. And it does feel like you are marrying the church a little bit, and a lot of the verbiage is the same. And how
like
do you
do sign things?
Both.
It's like weird.
Yeah, you sign a covenant. A lot of this is the same, and you do it in a church before a bunch of people.
Yeah, it is.
And it is, I think, inevitable that there will come a time that what is best for your family and what is best for the church will be in opposition.
Oh, 100%.
Sometimes they are the same, but sometimes they're not. And then you're like, okay,
100%. And I
what,
think,
what now, God?
yeah, that's probably up to each individual minister to decide. But I'll tell you, there's not a church on this planet that is worth my marriage. And they're going to lose every single time. Because while I'm very much Protestant, I don't feel like I work for the congregation, even though like I do work for the congregation. I feel like I work for the wider church and the Big C church, yeah. And there's a Protestant church somewhere that's looking for a part-time pastor. I know it. And if this doesn't work out,
especially in this day and age.
Yeah, exactly. I will just go over there and do Protestantism over there. But it's not. It just really isn't worth it to me. Now, I'm not saying it's not worth it to other people. I bivocational, and that gives me a little more flexibility and fluidity in my call, which is something that I think I need to thrive. But that's not always the case.
Yeah, that is not always the case in my life. I am not bivocational in ministry, although I was advised to make myself bivocational in ministry.
Oh, you mean like in seminary?
Before then, it was when I was first talking about my call, they're like, the future of ministry is bivocational, and I was like, nah, I'm gonna put all my eggs in this aging basket and go
yeah, it's like the Lindenberg basket building that's empty.
But I've heard a lot, especially a lot of older clergy that are a generation or two above us, in hindsight, now that their kids are up and grown, talk about, I wish I had made different choices when I was younger in clergy, when I had a young family, or when I was a young married person, a newlywed or whatever. I wish I had made different choices when it came to family life versus church life.
Oh, speaking of.
I'm gonna have to back that. Speaking of, ring-a-ding. Let me back that up so you can edit that out. But I've heard a lot of older clergy, a generation or two removed above us, so to speak, where now their kids are up and grown and they're well into their marriages, or those newlywed early young family years. I have often heard pastors lament what happened, or how they chose to split their time, or
Abby. Or
you hear these horror stories of, I left my kid's first t-ball game because I got a call from somebody that they needed me right then. And I think then you also, I don't know, it's hard. It has to be hard for the spouse, for the kids, for the family that is always being told, you are not as important, and like how damaging that can be. Like,
I've heard from more, I don't like using the word old, but like the older clergy folks, about how their, not just their time, but their theology didn't square with their kids, either their kids' lives or their kids' understanding of God or church or whatever. And that caused a bunch of tension. And then now that they're retiring, they're like, wow, I wish I hadn't had these like hills to die on with my kids, because I'd rather have my kids than be right about ecclesiology or something.
Yeah. Ooh, that's big. That's big stuff, and that's heavy stuff, because I don't know. Okay, let's pull it back to spouses, because I think there's this unofficial, unpaid, underline that, unpaid work that is expected of a clergy spouse. And I think that is sometimes a mantle that is heavier to carry than the stole itself, because you don't necessarily stand in front of the congregation and say, this is me, this is what I'm doing. You're always in that support role, but everyone's always watching you.
Oh yeah.
And not just watching, but judging. Are they doing X, Y, or Z correctly? Are they being in church correctly? Are they wearing the right thing, behaving the right way? Are they showing up every Sunday? Because if they don't, sometimes churches are like, oh, that means the pastor's marriage is going down the tubes.
Yeah. Do you need an
spouses
attorney? Do we need to find a good attorney for you?
Right.
Yeah. No, they're just out of town or something. Oh,
right.
They
get sick too. Like, it's okay.
One of the really not fun antique ways of thinking about clergy and their spouses for me is that I'm always seen as the breadwinner in the relationship. And if you, I don't want to sound ungrateful, but if you knew how much I made, you would be like, this clearly he's not the breadwinner in this relationship because I'm part-time
when they pass the annual
pastor.
budget, they look at that and be like, he's not.
Yeah.
They couldn't live in that house on this.
Yeah, exactly. Oftentimes it comes off and it's like, oh, that's cute that you even think that. But somebody had asked Anastasia if she worked. Oh, do you work somewhere too? And she looked at me and her eyes were like big, and in the car she was like, what was that about? And I was like, there's this whole other culture that you haven't been in. Even if you've been in church your whole life, you haven't been in this culture inside of the church. And they're never going to understand that we have a unique gender rolled marriage to begin with, but she is our breadwinner. And to think that, I don't know what she does. Maybe she stays home with the dogs. In their mind, they have this housewife idea. If you knew my wife, that's absolutely not her whatsoever. She's too amazing.
Yeah, I often make the joke that if mine and Trey's gender was flipped, because Trey is a school teacher, and the school teacher / clergy combo is one that goes way back.
Oh my God, I never thought about that. That's really funny.
Right, they seem to sandwich nicely together.
Yeah, you're like both part of the community, and you're both helping the kids. It's like everything that church committees want.
Yeah, and I will say there were folks that mentored me and are saying, this is actually going to help you when you're out in search and call, because a lot of times the folks that are on search and call, they might be a chair on the school board, might be able to help get your spouse a job and all of that stuff, which, like, I don't know how allowed that is, but
yeah, exactly.
But their thought of, okay, those are both jobs you can do anywhere, right? Or, if a town's big enough to have a church, it's big enough to have a school, probably, right? The kids in that community have to go somewhere. They're considered a good package deal. But I do think that beyond just that historic complementarian ideology, there is a good compatibility between Trey's profession and my profession, in that you're a little bit of a public figure in the community, where it will never cease to amaze me whenever his middle schoolers recognize him out in public, like with our family. It's like they're watching a dog walking on its hind legs. They're like, what are you doing here? Do you think I sleep in my classroom? Like, I the bell rings and I go home, right? Like,
oh wow, the teacher has to eat. That's so interesting, because you never see them doing anything else.
Yeah, at the Mexican restaurant that everybody goes to. But there is an understanding there that, I don't know, we're able to be sensitive to one another's jobs, where they're not traditional 9 to 5s all the time. Trey also coaches. His schedule can be weird, and my schedule can be weird. Nobody works a traditional 9 to 5 job. We also understand that me sitting in the stands on a Friday at a football game is really similar to him sitting in the pews in church on a Sunday, and people are going to give their unsolicited advice for our spouse to us in hopes that it, like, makes its way back, which is just wild, because I don't know, if anybody knows me, I know absolutely nothing about football other than when Trey first started coaching, I was like, now's the time for me to figure out what a down is, right? Like, like, I was not the one. So people will be like, they should run this scheme, and I just, sure, buddy. Where if you were to run up to Trey and be like, the liturgy should flow in this, he'd just start nodding you and be like, okay. Like,
like the Eucharist should be the crescendo or something. You're like, what?
Right. Yeah, but there's this assumption that the pastor's spouse has some sort of training or they have some wisdom about how things in the church would run. You hear a lot, the pastor's historically wife, she would lead the women's group, and it's assumed, and she never got paid for that, but like if she ever wanted to not do it, her husband would also lose his job.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So there's this expected of, we pay one person a salary, but we want the work of two people.
Absolutely. It really is tough with Anastasia being like all of her sisters and herself, they're all musicians. And I know that has got to itch a bunch of the folks in my congregation, because we don't have a musician right now. We used recorded stuff. Somebody recorded all of the hymns. Yeah, and we just play them on CDs because we don't have a musician. So I know they've got to be like, can't she like bring her hammered dulcimer and we can put a microphone by it, and then it's like Anastasia and I up on the stage doing, and I'm like, nobody's brought that up outside of the nativity. That's not going to be happening.
And I will say, I think churches are learning, because a lot of the horror stories I've heard of are from, like I said, a generation or two removed from us. So I think the church is getting better. In my experience, I think they're getting better, where there's still some weirdness, right?
Yeah.
But people have never threatened to take my job because my spouse isn't acting a certain way or wearing the correct thing.
Yeah. It's definitely feels like a residual thing right now. Like the Gen Xers and younger, like it would never cross their minds that you would hire somebody and then expect all of this work done by their spouse. That is insane. And the older generations grew up with that. Heck, when I grew up, there was a minister and his wife played the piano and the organ. Enough, he was also a school teacher. He was bivocational. My first pastor was bivocational. Go figure. But anyway, yeah, it's a really weird place to put your spouse. And it's a really fun place for me to put my spouse, because she's just not having it at all. And she's an engineer, so she doesn't really... She would be more with the maintenance guys than with
sign her up to be a trustee.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly. She would be like the chair of the trustees. And she was telling some group we were with recently that like when she was in college, she built a trebuchet, like a big catapult thing. And we were like, was it for a class or something? And she was like, no, I just really wanted to build one.
I just wanted to own a trebuchet.
Yeah. That's my wife, and she also has a hammer dulcimer that she can play. But
oh man,
yeah, she's amazing.
I want to talk about another component to this, is the role of the PK or the pastor's kid, where a lot of eyes are on the pastor's spouse, and where at some level they chose that, right?
Sure.
Most of the time. If I know in the early stages of courtship with Trey, I told him like, hey, I've got this call to my life and this is where I'm going. I'm going to be a pastor. If you can't like, that's going to entail weird stuff for you. It shouldn't, but it's gonna. Fair warning. If you're still down for all of this package, then we can proceed.
Oh man. I remember those days of trying to explain. Though in college, I'm not married, and I would go on dates, and I'd get interested in people, and be like, I'm going to be a pastor. And usually it was just, it's over, that's done.
Dude.
And then the ones that were like really excited about it, it was like I'm not that excited about this. This is awkward for me now.
I'm a reluctant pastor.
Yeah, I don't know about that. And then dating again in my mid-30s. And having to go through this whole nonsense all over again. I remember, so Anastasia and I met on a app, and...
Tell me it was Tinder.
No, it was Bumble, because Bumble's like the feminist
much more tame.
Themed app. That you can look it up. I don't have to, but anyway.
I'm not going to look it up.
Yeah, it's like women run, and it's more, whatever. Anyway, I'm like talking to her, and you have profiles, and here she's in the army, and we were talking about in the army. And I didn't put I was a pastor or a chaplain in my profile for very obvious reasons.
Ashamed.
Yeah, like I wasn't.
He wanted to go on at least one
that.
date.
Yeah, I wanted at least one date. And so she asked me what my AFSC is, which is like the acronym in the Air Force for like your job code, AFSC. And I told her, I think it's 54X or something like that, is chaplain. And so I know she was like, what's your AFSC?
You made her cross-reference an index?
Here's the weird thing. I did that because I didn't have to say pastor or chaplain. I could just say like 54X, right? And then she could... Here she's like this beautiful engineering brain, and she loves spreadsheets and cross indexes and stuff anyway. So she really appreciated that I knew that. But I remember she was like, wait, you're a chaplain? And I was like, this is over. So I was like, I might as well be funny about it. And I said something like, yeah, I'm like the coolest effing chaplain you ever met or something like that. I don't know. And
just knowing you in real life,
yeah.
I'm just cringing internally at what
it was so awkward. I was on my back porch.
God bless her for weathering through.
Yeah, I was at the back porch of my old house, and I was working in hospice chaplain at the time. And I was just like, okay, this is done. That was fun. We never even got to go like out on a date because it was the pandemic.
Oh my goodness.
But so there's like before you even get to the kids, I'm a clergy, or I want to be clergy, which sounds even worse at some points. Why? And for me, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. Luckily, that's something I got to skip over. I never had to do the dating as a pastor thing.
That's rough.
Did you? Of course you did, because you have to get ordained. But remember healthy boundaries training?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do have to do that every once in a while.
Yeah, we renew that with our anti-racism, pro-reconciling. I think, I don't know, every 3 or 5 years, I forget.
Yeah.
But on a recurring basis. But I remember I was at healthy boundaries training, and one of the, I lovingly refer to them as old-timers, was talking about, yeah, they had to start doing these because they need to tell people like when it was and wasn't appropriate to like date within your congregation or things like that, and how it used to be fine. Then the norm was that pastors were male. They're like, it used to be you'd go to your first call, you'd find a nice young lady who, and then and I'm just like, no, that would never be okay now.
No.
You could never have a romantic interest within your church. That would be a wild misuse of power and weirdness. So I'm very glad that not only I had Trey through seminary for support, but also I just didn't have to mess with all of that within church dynamics. And
yeah. You're aware of like how a lot of, especially smaller churches, everybody's married to each other's other family anyway. If the pastor married somebody in that church, they would instantly be related to everybody else in the church.
Yep.
And that would cause a very weird dynamic. I'm like thinking about my own congregation where there's 200 people but 3 families, and they're all married to each other. That's insane.
Yeah, everybody's somebody's cousin, sister, uncle situation.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about small churches is that they are families in a lot of sense. But yeah, I can't imagine the days when it was like okay for your new young pastor to be like, all right, which one of these ladies is gonna be my wife now?
It's so weird. Gosh, it just when I think I've got clergy things straightened in my head, then I remember stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to bring that up in therapy next month.
Add it to the list. Oh man. But anyway, sorry, we got off on a tangent.
Oh yeah.